So I think I finally figured out Donald Trump's motivations. It's like the movie Brewster's Millions. He was given the choice: take a small fortune up front, or you get incredible riches and power beyond belief if you can somehow figure out how to destroy the country in just 30 days. The Trump Report starts now!
You're tuning into the destination for TV superfan discussion, AFTERBUZZ TV. And now, let the buzz begin!
You know, there really is a song for everything. Welcome to the Trump Report! We're on Twitter at Trump Report ABTV. I'm Christian Bladt at ChristianDMZ. And to my left, camera right, Chelsea Galicia at Chelsea Galicia, the well-rested and energetic, didn't check the news at all on her vacation,
Yeah, right.
Chelsea Galicia.
I wish.
And Scott Moore at SMan80. Welcome to the Trump Report. Don't forget, of course, you should follow us on Twitter, as I said, like us on YouTube, comment, rate on iTunes, all that good stuff. So,
Comment
there's a lot
now.
to talk about. Yeah, oh, right, of course. And for those of you that are watching us live on YouTube, join us in the chat room. Neil, when you get a moment, if you can show us the chat, we'll see what Storage Yard Resident is up to. Because
And the other Kim K.
other Kim K will, of course, be there. I think Slinky will be there. There'll be the usual cast of characters. So, obviously, there's a lot to talk about. But let's talk sort of with the newest news, the actual news. The Supreme Court nominee, Neil Gorsuch? Mm-hmm. I was trying to think of a funnier way to say it, but I'm like, it's just sort of one of those Gorsuch. But there are two ways to talk about this. New York Times said in a very wordy way, a jurist whose conservative bent and originalist philosophy fit the mold of the man he would succeed. And National Review summed it down to a worthy heir to Scalia. So, if confirmed, Judge Gorsuch would restore the 5-4 split between liberals and conservatives on the court, and Justice Kennedy, who is 80, will be the swing vote as usual. So, Scott, obviously you were well versed in Judge Gorsuch before this, so you didn't have to scramble and look him up over the last couple hours, but you tell us all the vast knowledge you have of him.
Well, I would start by saying it's a surprisingly normal choice, on paper, a conservative choice, something I wasn't expecting from Donald Trump, because the whole day he's tweeting, big announcement tonight, making it like a TV reality show, and people were joking about that. But he fits the conservative choice for, Republicans are going to be very happy by this choice. The interesting thing that you brought up, though, is he actually was Kennedy's clerk, as well as Byron Wright. So he comes with the credentials. Again, he's a Harvard Law School grad. Actually, was at Harvard Law School when Obama was there. Very young, so that's another thing that's going to make conservatives very happy. He's only 49, so he can be on the court for 40 years.
He's almost young enough that he could have a show at AfterBuzz. Not quite, but he's almost that young. Yeah.
And he definitely has the Republican pedigree. His mom, Ann, was the EPA administrator under Reagan, the first female administrator. So he comes with the solid Republican credentials, conservative credentials, like you said. He obviously would not be someone I would pick if I was president, because I don't agree with his philosophy. He's a textualist, so again, he is very much under the Scalia type of mold. He's actually more to the right of Scalia if you really were to look at sort of his beliefs and what he has picked in the past and judged on in the past. He's to the right of Scalia, but he's actually not quite as far right as Clarence Thomas, who's really the most right out of everybody on the court right now.
That was literally the question I had in my head to say, would you say he's more to the right of Clarence Thomas?
I would say he would be left of Clarence Thomas, but to the right of Scalia. But, as tends to happen, there can be surprises, like David Souter, which was George H.W. Bush's pick, ended up being very liberal. And there's a thing
also known as the whoops pick. Yeah.
But even Kennedy, Reagan pick, which kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the 80s with, the last year picking a Supreme Court justice thing that doesn't, that whole BS that the Republicans did last year of a presidency kind of thing. He ends up being the swing vote, and he, again, was picked by a conservative and had the conservative credentials. So it's not to say that someone won't moderate over time, or that he's not going to be as conservative, but on paper he pretty much is. He was the big guy behind the Hobby Lobby decision, a couple years ago with the Obama administration with Obamacare. But he hasn't actually done any huge abortion cases or any LGBT cases. We're just seeing things from what he's said or what he's gleaned from the past of maybe what directions he would go for, which he seems very pro-religious freedom. And again, bottom line, a very normal pick from Donald Trump, which I was surprised about, for conservatives.
I think the very first question that he should be asked in his Senate hearing is, if the Senate does not hold a hearing for a Supreme Court nominee, is that a violation of the Constitution?
Well, I think that there are people who would like to ask that question, and I suppose it's possible. It would be interesting to know what his thinking is. So, Chelsea, as our self-admitted recovering attorney, your thoughts on, to some extent, thoughts on Judge Gorsuch, but also what this means if he is confirmed, which, to me, you should probably confirm this guy because the next guy is probably the one he really wanted to put on there.
I don't know. It is such a freaking disaster that Democrats didn't figure out how to get Merrick Garland in there. And it is so damaging to the country that Obama's pick didn't get a fair shot. And this kind of decision will last a long time. Like, I haven't even been alive for 40 years, like longer than my lifetime now. Sorry. So I think this was one of the reasons why, when I was, Bernie was out and I was like, all right, what do I do now? And everybody's like, the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court. And it's like, okay, fine, yes. I one of the top 3 reasons to support Hillary in the end was because of the Supreme Court. It is that important to me personally, and I think that important to what's going to happen to the country. And so I think it's a big frickin' deal. I mean, there's so many things coming at us left and right, the ban and DeVos and all the confirmation hearings. They all seem like a big deal. And many of them are a big frickin' deal. But this one is like a humongous frickin' deal. And so I just... when I was listening on the car ride over here, his speech, and sounds very smart and articulate, but he gets in there some sort of like jabs. Well, I take him as a jab. For Republicans, it's probably like nods of like I really believe in allowing Congress to write the laws, and that the justices are only supposed to apply the Constitution. It's sort of dog whistle politics. For I will give you whatever you want, Republicans. I will not really question it, because unless in the Constitution it says something, then it's not true. But it's very weird, because if you look at like Scalia was very convinced that corporations were people. Of course, it doesn't say that in the Constitution. It doesn't say anything about abortions strictly in the Constitution. And many conservatives say if something is not banned by the Constitution, then it's legal. So therefore, abortion would be legal. I don't necessarily agree with that line of thinking, but that's what they say. And so the hypocrisy rubs me all the wrong ways, and it's not a good day.
No, not at all. And that's what I was going to say, the hypocrisy, and that was part of my thing as I was getting my trolls on Twitter today, because I was basically writing to Mitch McConnell's Twitter, his hypocrisy of saying we need to, have these hearings right away and everything. And I think what they did last year, it was a very shrewd tactical move, and it worked for them this time, but it will not work in the future necessarily, and it sets a really bad precedence for any future Supreme Court vacancies, because now that's been set that anytime there's an election year, then Supreme Court nominees are not going to be heard, and it's a horrible, horrible, horrible precedence. And you're right with that. That should be question number 1 to this nominee: how do with the Constitution and everything, because it's a horrible precedence without a doubt, and it's terrible that Merrick Garland wasn't even heard last year.
Right. Well, our friend Jason Blair's in the chat room, and he says that his answer would be would be no, and he would be right. Now I'm just reading what's in.
It's the no to the question
the no
that I
to
asked.
the question that you said we'd be asking.
It's not unconstitutional?
It's not unconstitutional, is how he feels. And, I mean, if there had been a Democratic Congress, then that's who would have been on the Supreme Court. I wonder about, I'll let you get to the thought in a second. I wonder if there's any, long term, or we'll be able to look back as this being a unique instance, because we did have a justice pass away. Usually they retire to sort of match with the administration that they have, because I mean, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is going to be in there a lot longer than she wanted to. She was ready to go. You could definitely tell. But she's going to hang on. And I don't know. I don't know what we'll see. I understand the frustration, obviously, but I think it happened very early last year that Scalia died. If it had happened,
It was February.
yeah, if it had happened
13th.
closer to the election, it made more sense to me.
Yeah.
But at the same, because if it happened say, just hypothetically, it happened in September, well, then it sort of feels like you're trying to stuff something in there for an election you may have
But,
not won.
but I was going to say, even if it happened in September, the current president's term goes until January 20th. So regardless of when that is, it still sets a bad precedence. And where do we draw the line then? So then, if we're saying it's not unconstitutional, then we're going to say, well, we're not going to hear anyone now because the midterms are coming up next year. And that was the thing I had tweeted to Senator McConnell. I was like, should we now wait until the midterms so everyone has a voice for their senators, since their senators are the ones deciding on the nominee? I mean, where do we draw the line? And that's the problem. If we're saying that's not, then what do we do with that? And there's been talk that there wasn't always 9, and there wasn't always 9 Supreme Court justices. So
yes, our friend Jason just pointed
why not
that
go
out.
down
But
to
by the
8,
way,
7,
there
6?
could be 10 or 11.
Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting to see.
It's a slippery slope, and William Rehnquist had died. He had gotten ill and passed away during Bush's administration. So these justices are all, and the majority of them are in their 70s and 80s, and there is a good chance that someone could pass away unexpectedly because they're older. So it just sets a very bad precedence, because again, now we're starting to decide when is it appropriate for a president to submit, and frankly the term is January 20th to January 20th. So that means if it happened January 1st, then he should still have the opportunity to submit a nominee, and that's
well,
the way
you
it
can
should
submit it, or and then what happened last year is probably what happened.
But
I felt like you were trying to get something in,
that's
Chelsea.
a problem, and that's not good for democracy when that happens.
Did you just go back to Guatemala mentally? Did you just ship?
No. Sometimes I read people's comments and I'm like, I can't believe I share the same planet with them.
Well, that's not a nice thing to say. These are people who are kind enough to watch our show, and some of them every week.
Some of them, like in their statement, in their comment, say something that is, it's, never mind. I don't even want to point it out, but it's just like how do you
Well, look, to that point, to some extent, obviously this is a very polarizing time in this country. It's very divisive. And I saw Bruce Lee in the chat room, who we appreciate you being here most weeks. You did make an interesting statement, though. You said conservative equals asshole. And I feel like
Lauren, you're not crazy.
I feel like that's not the kind of, that doesn't help. Let's put it that way. You can certainly feel that way, but that sort of approach doesn't help sort of get through some of these topics, which we have the really big topic, and we were talking beforehand. We're going to probably not get to too many different things here because this is a big one. We're going to talk about it very slowly. There's going to be some disagreement, but everybody's going to get their chance to talk about it. So, in processing, trying to understand, which I still don't understand, by the way, I tried to better understand President Trump's executive order on immigration. So I did some research this afternoon. I had a couple of different articles. I had one from the Washington Post, and it was a very thorough piece that David French wrote for the National Review. Now, the National Review is an opinion piece, is an opinion magazine, I guess is the best way to put it. But at the same time, I do think that they're a very competent organization in terms of collecting information. It definitely skews, but I think I just needed something else that basically wasn't the Washington Times. And so I kind of mixed and matched some thoughts from both of those, and we'll sort of talk a little bit about it. And obviously there can be plenty of counterpoints here in the studio, and those of you in the chat room, and of course everybody on Twitter at Trump Report ABTV. So what exactly did President Trump do? Did he implement the Muslim ban that he promised on the campaign trail? No, that is not exactly what he did. He kind of backed off a little bit from the campaign promises, not saying that, you know, there couldn't be those around the corner. But this was an executive order that was, believe it or not, designed to moderate refugee restrictions and temporary provisions aimed directly at limiting immigration from what they consider to be jihadist conflict zones. It's very wordy, but that's me cutting down a few paragraphs. So we're going to talk a little bit about the key provisions, and would be great if we're able to sort of come to some better understanding. But I've seen a lot of coverage about this where I don't know that the people talking about it on both sides really understand what this was. And I mean very strongly that both sides are definitely sort of running with this in completely the wrong direction. Chelsea.
First of all, that comes up for me is the constitutionality of it.
Okay.
And it's not constitutional.
In what way? Because it's an executive order, or?
No, because it is illegal to discriminate against somebody based on the country that they come from. And even though, you know, he has this whole, like, you know, the safety of the, it's all a bunch of B frickin' S. The law school professor that has remained my idol, well, he wasn't my professor, but he did become the dean of UC Irvine's law school, which wasn't around until after I went to law school, but be that as it may, Erwin Chemerinsky is my personal legal scholar hero, and he wrote a great article for the LA Times that really nicely lays out why it's unconstitutional, and that really it's not that complicated to see that it is very unconstitutional. So whether it's like, is this a Muslim ban? But no, because he didn't ban all Muslims. And I saw somebody arguing, it doesn't say Muslims in there, so it's not a Muslim ban. I just, you know, the ridiculous comments that I see from the get-go, just what it says on its face is unconstitutional. And so I almost don't even want to get into the nitty-gritty of it, because it seems like we're then normalizing it or validating it by talking about the details of it, when it's like we just got to shut it down from the very top, as in this cannot fly. And that a judge tried to stop it, 4 judges tried to stop it, and they're like, well, we're just going to keep going. I mean, this is now hinging on breaking democracy, because when the checks and balances don't work, we're all screwed.
No, now that last statement I definitely agree with. I think it is important to sort of go through some of the things. In the chat, Jason Blair pointed out that he thinks that most Trump voters probably expected that this would last longer than 90 to 120 days. And to the point that has been made by others in the media, there are some key Muslim countries that are not factored into this. Case in point, all of the countries that the 9/11 terrorists all came from, and it's just sort of an interesting omission. And you know, you can
Omission.
Which is the fact that they brought it up
Yeah.
multiple times,
and
when he was doing this executive order, he mentioned 9/11 3 or 4 times.
And you can believe it's because, you know, Saudi Arabia is a very close ally. Probably wrongly, I'll say. You can go further and say it's because Trump has business dealings with him. I think it has a lot more to do with who our allies are.
Right.
You know, these are.
But that's a coincidence, though. But a very strong coincidence.
It's a very strong
Turkey,
coincidence.
Egypt,
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia, he has properties of investments in those countries,
And these are,
those are
you know,
conveniently
look,
left off.
These are countries that have to sort of try to lighten the mood. There's some bad hombres in these countries. Iraq, Syria, Iran, Libya. I can't believe that you could come here from Libya for the last 30 years. I'm surprised at all. Let me just get through the list. There's only 3 more. Somalia, Sudan, and Yemen. So those are the ones that are
Many
specifically
countries that we're bombing, that we're destroying.
Right. The majority
We're
of those
creating
we're actually
havoc,
we're
and then we're like,
causing the
oh,
problem.
we don't want to have anything to do with it, even though we started. It's like, it's like I had a little sister, and she would like kick me under the table, and then I would like punch her back harder, and then of course she's like, ow, and then, you know, parents get mad at me. But it's like, they're screaming out in pain because of what we kicked. Didn't just kick them under the table. We freaking bombed them.
I'm currently bombing them.
And so it's to be like,
awful.
oh, we need to defend ourselves. Wait a minute, we're being aggressive in the first place. So when I see these short-sighted comments about we have to take care of ourselves first, it's like, how about we stop being so aggressive in the first place? It's just, I don't know if people don't know what's going on, don't understand psychology, or just I don't understand totally why people are so ignorant.
Well, if we're not going to stop our aggression, all the more reason to not let people who have a bone to pick with us into the country.
But that's the problem, though, is
How
the
is
fact
that ever
that
gonna work?
it's not going to work, and the fact is he's making us more safe, but in reality, it's making us less safe.
Did I understand
because the
this
world
right?
is more angry and upset and across the
Oh,
board.
yeah,
This is
you
like
would-
psychology
You
101.
have certainly stirred up a pot and
doesn't
upset
help.
people in
Right.
completely other countries in this country.
It doesn't help
Yeah.
make the world safer. It makes it less safe.
Does everybody need? We need a constitutional law class that's required for everybody, and like psychology 101
Yes.
about how people. There's very simple cause and effect of behaviors that are pretty fundamental. That I did you take psychology in high school? Where?
I took it in high school.
I took it in
yeah.
college. It was one of
I may have
my
taken it in college.
minors.
I don't remember.
But
I mean, there's a lot of they focus on the disorders in high school, but it's just
well,
it just
Donald Trump
seems,
has a lot of them too.
oh
You
my
could dedicate
gosh!
a whole
Wait, hold on. Did you
chapter
guys?
to the
Raising her
to the
hand, She
DSM.
clearly has something to say.
Did you see that
Catalog.
Jason Chaffetz suggested that maybe we need to have a mental health evaluation for presidential nominees?
We said it now, but he didn't say it earlier.
Right.
I know.
That's
Spoke,
interesting.
yeah.
So
I was like,
I think that and the tax releases should be part of the process to
Jason
be president.
Chaffetz clearly running for something in the next few years, which I
I was
think
almost
is just-
impressed. I was impressed for
I
like
know.
30 seconds.
But back to the executive order for the specifics of it. You know, there was a phrase that now President Trump used during the campaign, which was, we're going to use extreme vetting, which saying extreme vetting makes it sound like, you know, the bigly, the huge, and those things. And I think I understand the concept of, you know, we should definitely vet people from a number of countries, whether you agree with the ones that are on the list or aren't. That's not
Hold
the
on
point.
a second. Aren't we doing that?
We
already?
already are.
We have a really strict process. Nobody that's gotten through that process in the last, I don't know how long,
to the
has
point-
killed any of us.
Right. But to
so-
the point that those processes
More people
were
have
put in
died from
place.
car accidents or
And I
people
was gonna say, more
texting
people
and
died
driving.
from white, you know, men going out here and going for religious
Dylan
purposes
Roof,
here
anybody?
in the U.S. And that's the problem, is that we're focusing on the wrong thing.
And I understand people are scared. People are scared,
Right,
but
and
it's
I
like
get that,
it's
but-
like coddling a child who's scared of a monster under their bed. We're like, okay, we're going to kill the monster. We're going to kill the monster. At what point do you tell them there's not a monster under your bed? That there's actually other things to worry about?
Well, to be fair, we're not going to kill the monster. We're going to send the monster to Gitmo and see if we can get any information out of the monster for some of its monster allies. Just to point of order. Now, I don't know. Look, I understand. Look, there's been the transfer of power that obviously a lot of people are upset about. These things were put in place by a different administration with a different outlook. So the idea that, all right, we want to slow things down a little bit and take a look at it and figure out what we need to change. Obviously, that is not the extent of what's happened. You know, if it was just like, all right, we're going to slow things down a little bit. This was like, all right, we're going to stop everything for, you know, 3 or 4 months, depending on which part of it you're looking at. And ultimately, they want to cap refugee admissions at 50,000 people per year, which is sort of reflective of what happened during President Bush's term. So they definitely want to roll back the odometer a little bit, like they tried to do in Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Oh,
Yes.
I'd like to address storage. What if
Storage
you do
address-
find a monster under the bed? Then you deal with that monster, which is what Obama did when he suspended people coming from Iraq for 6
Yes,
months.
in
Because there
2011,
was
yeah.
a specific threat that they found, and that they were doing. They were looking into that specific threat. They were looking at that specific monster to see if there was anything there.
But what
much
you would
more
do with
pointed.
the monster is make sure that it has legal representation and its case is heard and it does not get sent off to Gitmo.
Yes, that's probably
Look,
true.
we're pro-monsters here, all right? Don't let anyone say that the Trump Report is an outlet that is anti-monster. It's mostly the friendly Sesame
what I'm
Street
saying
kind.
is, if there actually is a monster, then we deal with it. But the thing is that we are addressing too many made-up monsters.
Yeah.
Right. That's the thing, is that it's too vague. And like you were saying with Obama's ban in 2011, had a specific threat. This is just a vague blanket for countries, and it doesn't really go to the root of the problem. And already now, customs agents can stop anyone and do a secondary screening when they come in the country. Even if they have their green card and everything else, if they feel that they're suspicious, they're able to do a secondary screening before they're allowed to enter the country. We already have a lot of checks and balances without having to go through this and stopping specific groups of people from coming in.
Like, I would have much preferred that he started cracking down on, like, the heroin overdoses. Those are killing more Americans than terrorists. So, and he did address it in his campaign, that was a really big problem. And he wants to address it in the wrong way. But at least, I mean, I would be on board with an effort to address a problem that is actually a problem.
Okay, that's one way to look at it. The other is in terms of potential problems you're trying to prevent.
But it's not like it's open borders completely and we don't have any vetting.
But if somebody goes and overdoses on heroin at a shopping mall, that's going to impact the, you know, individual who overdoses on heroin and the horrified children. Now, if you're worrying about potential terrorists coming in with bigger ambition, that could obviously impact more people. So to the extent that, sure, heroin overdoses are very important, but I think that this is also important. And I don't know that I feel that this has been addressed in the best way.
There's not a scarcity of resources for us to address these problems. You can have careful vetting, which I think history shows that we must have pretty careful vetting because we haven't had a terrorist attack from a foreign terrorist on our soil since 9/11. Did I get that right? And that
besides the Boston Marathon, but they were
the
here.
American citizens,
They came back
or
here.
they had been.
You're splitting hairs at that point. But let's talk about, you know, the magnitude of 9/11. There's been nothing to that extent.
But the problem is,
meanwhile, thousands are dying of, like, drinking too much soda and it's not even heroin. It's actual legal pain meds and so many other problems.
I mean, I think
that
that's a much more serious problem than, you know, the sodas. The people are going to drink it or not.
The painkillers.
But I'm telling you, sugar is killing more people than terrorists.
But going back to the terrorism thing, like you were saying, is the problem is there's always going to be a way for somebody to do something. Whether is if they can't get in, then somebody else from another country will. Homegrown terrorism is a huge problem.
That's where we should focus if we want to focus on terrorism. It's homegrown.
Feel, you know, this is more about optics to make people feel like, oh, he's taking charge and being law and order, but it really doesn't, again, go to the root of the problem, except make a blanket, nondescript kind of ban that does nothing in the big scheme of things to improve our safety, but does everything to piss off, like I said, the rest of the world. And it just makes it more right for people to be like, well, now we need to, you know, get back at America. And it's just not the right way of looking at it. And
that's the inevitable thing, is that it's going to piss more people off, hate us more, and they will. The deeper the hatred, the increased will for them to overcome
find
whatever.
a way to do whatever they need to do. Just like the wall. The wall is not going to stop people from coming over or drugs coming over to this country. It's not going to. There's always ways around.
There's a simple reason why the wall won't work is because there will still be tunnels. So
and water and going around, you know, and coming in other ways.
And ladders.
It just doesn't work.
Helicopters.
So
planes.
it's focusing on the wrong thing to solve a problem. And yes, it's not an easy problem to solve, but this is the wrong way of looking at it to solve this problem. And it's just very bad for very bad precedence. Again, sort of like the Supreme Court nomination. It's bad precedence for us to be doing these type of things.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously it'll be, as with anything, you know, we'll have hindsight and look back as to whether or not the vetting that was in place during the previous administration was thorough enough. It could very well have been. And, you know, this is sort of big overall umbrella idea. The idea that you just want to take a look and think about it again, I don't have a problem with that. I think that where, if we can shift a little bit, is where the problem comes in as to how this was implemented, specifically over the weekend.
But here's the thing, though, too, is, and it was a horrible rollout, you know, logistically and PR-wise. But here's the thing.
It was like a new Coke kind of rollout.
Yeah, if you're going to do something like that, you know, he talks about all this stuff. Well, why does everyone have to say everything? Why can't they work on vetting processes behind the scenes without making this into a whole thing? You know, why not make this you know, if you're talking about a blanket, you should be working on everybody coming in the country from every part, because, you know, there's a lot of people that have come to Europe that, you know, you could say that too, that have terrorism threats that came from France and other places that have emigrated there. So you should be looking across the board, and you should do it behind the scenes. You don't have to make it into a big political move. See how the vetting process works for the next 3 to 4 months. If you don't feel that it's working right, you can make the changes behind the scenes, increase it, change it, whatever you have to do, without doing this overall ban that doesn't really stop what they're claiming it's going to do.
To your point, the way that this ought to have been implemented was that, you know, over the next couple weeks, more and more people coming into the country were like, boy, that sure took a lot longer at the airport than it used to. Oh, well, let's go out to dinner. You know what I mean? It should be that sort of on the level of it would be the people who were actually going through the maybe extra layer of like, let's sit down and talk in this room for a little bit because you come from this country. But yeah, it's the big, huge rollout of it, which of course is what happens when you do have a president who was literally a game show host.
Right, and you don't have your team in place yet. You don't have the State Department people in place yet. You don't, obviously, the Attorney General. You don't have the certain facets of the government that you should have at this point to be setting something up like this. And that's why you can go into the whole, Sally Yates thing and all that too. I mean, and that's part of the problem is you don't have your team in place yet. So this should have been something that you should wait for and be doing behind the scenes without rolling this out into making a big flip. Because to me, it's now just a political thing. And it's not anything to do with really keeping us any more safe.
Right. I don't know that it actually will keep us any more safe. And to your point earlier, it could very well make us less safe. And unfortunately, we will find out if that is the case. Let's talk about Sally Yates, who there was a brief moment that everyone was applauding her. And, she was someone who was, probably not that excited about being the acting, interim. She didn't want that role, so she was like, "I think that I'll probably just go out in a blaze of glory."
Right, and she knew that,
and she did. And when she gets her show on MSNBC, it's going to be because of that,
or becomes governor of Georgia, where she's from.
whatever the next chapter of the Susan Yates story is. But the fact that she was fired and the outrage over it, you don't like the president. Okay, we get that. The president, you're saying, the president has made this a priority and he signed it into law. I am not going to enforce it. You're going to get fired.
Right.
We've seen that happen for presidents in any administration, or, either party, I mean. So it was not really a surprise. No. But obviously it got a lot of attention. And look, on a legitimate level, I sort of made light of this being a good career move. She clearly did not feel comfortable about doing it. And you should take that stand. And people did take a stand. We saw the people that showed up at the airports and people that went out and, supported, whether it be online, but the airports were the thing that was more visible. And to the extent that maybe I don't understand it as well, do you, Chelsea, and you, Scott, do you feel like the people who actually saw that this was happening got up and went out and, they gathered and they protest, do you feel like that had an immediate impact and a long-term impact to this? I'll ask you
on
first.
Who?
On this legislation and how it's enforced going forward.
Well, I don't think that these protests probably get into the psyche of Trump himself. He is sort of delusional enough to twist things into. But
he was blaming Delta on with their computer outage on Twitter. He was blaming them for that, not protesters or even acknowledging them.
But the only hope is that people around him have a conscience, and like I always say, that it keeps that the more of us are waking up to what is going on. I think a lot of people have been sort of in denial that really evil can take over. I mean, it's because I haven't witnessed like outright evil in my lifetime, like a Holocaust or something like that. And I know it's happened on the other side of the world, but it seems so
genocide and
distant that it like can't be real. And then now it's like maybe a Holocaust type situation, like a horrible thing like that could happen again in our lifetime that we will either witness or be victim of, that it is really, really real. And people are waking up to it, protesting. I love the protests. Whether or not they're effective in changing anybody's, the administration at all is almost besides the point. It is more important that Americans stand up and that slowly start to pull everybody into this awakened state so that hopefully we can put a clamp on this in 2 years, if not sooner.
Right, and I think it's very important for that. But kind of going back to Sally Yates is that I think, on one hand, she had a right to do what she wanted to do. And she did. She had a right to stand up to this. And it's funny because Jeff Sessions even had a whole thing that he had asked her, like, should you be able to speak up against the president if you feel something is unconstitutional or whatnot? So, it's not a surprise that she did. She knew she was leaving. This was temporary. So she was able to get herself out there and make herself a household name.
We can say that the Attorney General is not supposed to be loyal to the president.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. Jeff Sessions, and that's the ironic thing, the one that, is going through the nomination right now, actually had asked her that same thing. Can you be can you separate yourself from the president and speak up when you need to? So on one hand, yes, it's not a surprise. On the other hand, you're absolutely right. The president has a right to fire her, and you would have expected that. And she knew that when she was doing this.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was only a matter of time, and she knew she was only there temporarily. And he almost had to do it too, because if he didn't, then it automatically neuters his presidency right there. Because if
it's a weekend, you can't have.
So
people
you knew that was going to happen.
That, yeah.
But again, my problem was the release that they put out. It's one thing that they couldn't just relieve her of her duties and everything. What they had to do is say, that she betrayed, him and the laws, and that she's weak on immigration, and she's an Obama nominee. Like, that's the problem that I have, again, is that he can't ever seem to just let it go and be, we relieved her of her duties, whatever the case is, instead of having to go and tear her down, weak on immigration, weak on borders, weak on this. And it was a terrible release. And again, it just makes us as a country look bad.
It was a release that I think if you peel the White House masthead off of the top of it, it actually said from the desk of Sean Hannity. You could really tell because it was just like, okay, so that's where we're at. And look, they had every reason to be upset.
Right, but again,
happened,
that's
but
not
there's a way to word it.
Right, that's not the way you put it out there. And again, it makes us look bad. So again, I understand, and I understand both sides of it, and I know that she had the right to do what she did. We knew that Trump had the right to fire her and would have done that, and she knew that. But again, it's the way they handle it that is just wrong and terrible.
To fire her was the wrong thing to do.
Right, but he had a right to do that, and that's not where I have the problem. I have more the problem with the way that they handled it again, and that was the type of release.
Once she took that stand, there was no other choice for him to do. He had to fire her.
From the egomaniac perspective, no choice.
I'm the president.
But from
I'm
a
legal,
legal, constitutional, could have left it alone.
I mean, he can fire anybody he wants to.
He could have left it alone. He could have left it alone. You're right.
Listen, an employer can fire a woman for being pregnant. Doesn't mean it's lawful.
Are you saying that Susan Yates was pregnant? You heard it here first in the Trump report. To backtrack to... Oh, go ahead. No,
but I was going to say, but the last thing is that it's really going to help her in the long run. Because now she's a household name that she wasn't really before. She's going to go out there, like you said, she's going to have a talk show, probably book offers. People are trying to convince her to run for governor of Georgia.
She will keynote one of the nights of the DNC in 2020.
Right.
She will, it'll be a big night.
So it worked for her.
To a point that Chelsea made earlier that, whether or not another Holocaust could happen, it's very likely to happen somewhere that we're starting to take less refugees from. It could happen in Syria. Some would say that sort of thing, obviously not camps and the same exact sort of organization, but in terms of the, elimination of the general populace.
Yeah.
And again, it's so far away, we don't think of it. And there's something to be said for having all of these Syrian refugees show up. You hear the stories of the families that got turned away because they had applied. And, it was a nightmare on multiple levels, but it was a bad PR nightmare. I mean, there was a story that I saw about an Iranian woman who'd lived here for 7 years. She was getting her PhD and she couldn't get back, even though she had a green card. And the article that I referenced from the National Review mentioned that, up until the point where people with green cards were turned away, they didn't give it an endorsement, but they understood the reasoning for it. But if that's something that continues to happen, that is a major problem.
It's unconstitutional to discriminate against somebody based on where they come from or for religious reasons. It's just...
But then people will have to challenge that. And I don't actually know what the ACLU accomplished when they showed up. It seemed like some of those cases that were sort of in limbo, people who were tied up for a while, those did get moved along. I don't know that it fixed this. I do know that my social media was a lot happier all of a sudden because of the people that I follow.
Because we had a taste of the checks and balances that exist in our democracy, and the court stood up and said, no, this is not going to fly. Very likely it's not going to fly, so we're going to stop it. And so you get a sense of reprieve from the fact that we don't have a dictatorship. We've got a system of checks and balances, and that at some point the courts will step in and do what's right. So that's why everybody was excited about it. But then the fact that Department of Homeland Security ignored it gets frightening all over again.
And people were told that they could disobey it in there. And but I think I was going to say, going back to the reprieve, is the fact that they were basically had said, like you said earlier, is like green card holders were being denied, and that's wrong. If they have a green card, they've been properly vetted. They're immigrants. Immigrants have their green card. Non-immigrants have a visa. So if you have a green card, and that was part of the problem, is they were being stopped, they were being hassled, and that should not happen. They have the right to come into the country just like anyone else with a U.S. passport. If you have a reason
that you're concerned about specific people with green cards, then there's a process you can follow. You can.
But that's already happened, and they have their green card, and so that was the problem, and that's where the ACLU really stepped in to make sure that these people that had green cards and had the proper paperwork and had everything were able to get through and not be detained.
But so you thought the ACLU was ineffective and that they should not be doing anything?
Not that I thought they didn't do it, that they shouldn't be doing anything. I was wondering legitimately because I didn't understand. In the moment, it seemed like it was a big deal. Now that we've had a couple days, I wasn't sure if it had actually helped. That's all I was asking, not in the way where I knew the answer, which as a lawyer, never ask a question you don't know the answer to. I didn't know the answer. But that's why we're here. We're here to talk about these things, and we could talk about this issue all day, but there is one other thing we should get to, and some people would say that all of this maybe was a little bit of a diversionary tactic away from the fact that Steve Bannon is going to have a role in the National Security Council. Now, there were a lot of articles about how he needs Senate confirmation, but if you look deep enough, he's not an actual chair on the Security Council. It's some secondary advisory committee. So no, he doesn't need it. And there were people, very respected, very smart people who were very excited that they tweeted it out. Jonathan Alter, he was the one who tweeted it, and everybody's like, great. And then other people who were also happened to be very smart but just disagree with him were like, actually, no, that's not the case. And, so it's... we've first talked about Steve Bannon on Trump versus Hillary. There's someone who's not sitting here right now who kind of brushed it off like, Steve Bannon's not going to make any difference. Maybe I'll pull that clip, but if I do, I'll show it to the person that'll make him cry. Hi, Drexel, I hope you're watching. But, and
this, I've been seeing a lot of articles about, are we being gaslighted? Are we being distracted by something like this ban when really the bigger evil is Bannon and the consolidation of power. And their shadow
government, like they like to call it, without having to deal with checks and balances.
I'm waiting for the word Bilderberg. I haven't heard it yet, but no, yeah. Look, I've made no bones since what I referenced earlier on the Trump versus Hillary. I don't know Steve Bannon, but I definitely know people who know him, and all I said early on is that he's a bad guy. I continue to say he's a bad guy.
Yes. That's the bad hombre that should be vetted.
That is definitely a bad hombre.
And that goes back to what we were saying earlier. Some of these people that are being, for these high positions in his cabinet and everything else, are vetted less than they're trying to vet these people coming into our country. I mean, these people that are totally unquinalified.
I saw an article that quoted the executive order, when it was all about... the kinds of people that we want to keep out. And then it was like, well, then why don't we just get Trump and Bannon to cross the border, and they will not be able to get back in.
Do extreme vetting on them because they don't fit the criteria.
By the way, as a quick aside, we'll get back to Bannon in a second, but I saw that the way that they have to build the wall, because of the way that the Rio Grande flows, there are people who live in Texas who are going to be on the wrong side of the wall, the way that they're planning to build it. But anyway,
I reposted an article that suggested that we make the wall out of solar panels. And I said, this may be a wall I could get behind.
Yeah, same with me. I know, I did see that article. And that would be, the Southwest, that would be fantastic.
Brilliant.
Power
Brilliant.
But then the wall would cost so much more than it's already going to cost.
Actually, I don't think so.
No.
Oh, but I'm sorry, Mexico's going to pay for it, so they can build it out. They can put gold flakes on top of
which, of course, Trump would love that.
But my point
about... And the idea that a wall is going to deter people is just so false. I've spoken to many people in Mexico, Guatemala, Costa Rica. I don't think people really understand the desperation that people have. I mean, there was the thing that people already go through to get here are so horrific. I have sat there and I have listened to people tell me the stories of what they've gone through and witnessed, not even having to do with the wall itself. And I've asked people, if there's a wall built, if there are people standing there with machine guns ready to blow you away, would you still try it? And they say, yes, I have no choice. I feel like I have no choice. So a wall is going to be a deterrent. Please.
Right.
Jason chimes in that the wall would pay for itself with federal solar tax credits, which he threw an LOL in there. So see, we can have fun in the chat. He had an interesting point before that. I wish liberals would decide whether Trump is an idiot with no experience or an evil genius who is secretly setting up sleight of hand tricks to stage an executive branch coup. And it's true. Both of those narratives do seem to be running parallel.
They do.
And
but
one
both
can
are
be
possible.
true. Well, it's possible if the second category is
you
people
can be
who
an
are
idiot and genius. An idiot when it comes to the Constitution and a genius when it comes to evil.
Doing your
So I don't think that those are mutually exclusive.
with other people.
Yeah.
You can be the manipulated, sort of like the puppet, and you can have other people pulling the strings that are helping with the evil doing.
Yes, and speaking of evil, to get back to Steve Bannon for a moment, all I was going to say is, I don't even need to get to the point where I try to figure out if he's a neo-Nazi. You can decide for yourself if you think that's true. Before I get anywhere near that, I already know he's a bad guy, and he shouldn't.
But regardless,
he
shouldn't have that kind of access. Regardless, good, bad, any president. I would be uncomfortable if Hillary Clinton was doing the same thing with having her. I would not want that person there over the DNI or the Joint Chiefs of Staff on a regular, and those two are not going to be on the regular.
That's the issue.
That's the problem.
Is that they were, the White House says that they were not demoted, but it's sort of a more symbolic, they seem like they're sort of marginalized
compared to his role being upgraded and theirs being like they don't have to be there.
The White House will make the point that David Axelrod would walk in and out of Security Council meetings, but at the same time, they didn't name him to
they didn't have a chair sitting there for him that he's in there every single meeting, and that's where I have the problem with that. Is that person should not have that kind of unfettered access, and that sets a dangerous precedence for any future people to have that kind of access as well. And it's
Jason, I think you really boiled it down perfectly. That Trump is basically Dr. Claw from Inspector Gadget. I think we're all Inspector Gadget, except we need a penny.
Gadget.
We need a penny who can sort of figure things out for us. Anyway, I think we talked about 3 things today, and I didn't try and get overly ambitious, but you weren't here last week, Chelsea, and we only have about a minute or so, maybe 2 minutes. Do you want to weigh in on TPP at all? Because that was
last week
we would have loved to have talked to you about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy that we're not going forward with the TPP. I question the motives and if he's going to replace it with something worse, which actually hadn't even occurred to me until I talked to Drexel about. He's like, "Do you think he's going to pass or try and get something passed that's even more corporate friendly?" And I was like, "Dear God, I didn't even know that
Drexel.
That was possible." It gave me a new kind of nightmare. So yeah, woohoo for the TPP.
But what's going to happen in the future? That was my concern too.
Yes.
Well, I'm glad you were able to say that succinctly because, the clock is not our friend. It never is here on Trump, the Trump Report. I almost called it...
Two quick things.
Please.
That I want to say that at least are positive. I'm going to leave neutral because, Trump did leave the Obama LGBT...
Yes, I did actually want to talk about that. I'm glad you brought it up.
Executive order in place for now. It doesn't make me feel any better, but at least it's neutral for the moment. The other good thing, which actually didn't come from a progressive, but I actually do agree with, is Governor Bill Haslam of Tennessee. The Republican governor there has wanted to do free community college for Tennessee residents. He wants to give postgraduate graduation rates up to 55% in Tennessee, and I will definitely stand behind that. To give state residents free community college is a huge step in the right direction. If it's Republican, Democrat, or whatever, we saw that in New York. That's a plan they want to do now, and we'll see how it's going to work out in Tennessee. They want to cover it with federal Pell Grants and also the state lottery to help allow anyone that wants to go as a state resident to 2-year community college for free, which I think is fantastic.
If only someone ran for president who wanted to maybe, I don't know, give people, college educations, but, it just didn't happen. So
I want to do a quick plug for, I'm not sure. So tomorrow I head to D.C. to attend a conference.
You're going to get arrested again.
This time, not intentionally.
Okay, fair enough.
At least that's not my
It'll
plan.
It'll be a better
right
story if you get arrested this time.
Yeah.
Right, because I'm not planning on it.
Right.
Yeah, no, this is for a conference called Sister Giant. It's a progressive conference that you can either go to DC or you can live stream at sistergiant.com. Bernie will be speaking on Thursday evening. A number of others from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party will be speaking too, and I'm excited to go. I'm not excited for the cold. I'm a little nervous about that.
It just got warm here again finally, and
but
over there.
yeah.
Well,
I
great.
can't wait to hear all about it
I know.
next week.
I hope you'll be back next week. I never know because you see, look at that. You're
She's
going
a
off to watch
globetrotter.
it. It's true. I'm just jealous. But anyway, we are out of time. Thank you to everybody who was in the chat. We really appreciated it. It was a very important part of the show. It always is. So if you're able to watch live, please join us. If not, follow us on Twitter at TrumpReportABTV. And of course, like us on YouTube, comment, rate. Definitely write a little review on iTunes. It only takes a minute. It actually helps the show a lot. For Scott Moore at SMan80, Chelsea Galicia at Chelsea Galicia. I'm Christian Bladt at Christian DMZ. And my personal podcast, The Blattcast, BLADTCAST. We're doing a live YouTube stream right after the Super Bowl. It's a little plug there. We're going to be doing that on Sunday, so check that out. But we will see you back here next Tuesday at 7 Pacific, 10 Eastern on the Trump Report. Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.